A lot of you guys really love these flat, pocketable mini PCs. And yeah, they're pretty cool. But you do have to accept some compromises over the bigger minis out there. Luckily, with this one, fan noise isn't one of them. This is a quiet mini PC. Anyway, we're going to cover all you need to know about the Morefine M6 N200 right after this message. Have you lost a product key on your PC? EaseUS Keyfinder can recover and back up all product keys on your system. With this app, you can display product keys of Windows, Office, Adobe products, and more. You can also find Wi-Fi codes, browser accounts, and passwords. Try it for free with a link in the video description. Morefine's M6 comes in two flavors, the very common Intel N100 processor and the rarely seen, slightly more powerful N200. Both are 4 cores with no hyper-threading and running UHD graphics. The difference between the two is $40 US on the Morefine website, while the only one available on Amazon.com is the N200 for $229. It comes with 16GB of LPDDR5 memory and a 512GB NVMe drive. Incidentally, that's the exact configuration of the one I've been given for review. In the box, you'll get the usual accessory kit, HDMI cord, screws, and monitor mount. The M6 uses a USB-C power supply and all the ports are on the back. The first Type-C is for power. Then there's an audio jack. Type-C with display out, Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN, HDMI 2.0, and triple USB 5 gigabit. You can run dual 4K displays with the M6. Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth are handled by the Intel AX201 chip. Something that's really cool with these flat minis is just how easy they are to open. With this one, it's just one screw to get to the storage slots. Slots. The M6 supports 2 NVMe drives and one of them can also handle M.2 SATA. LPDDR5 memory is soldered on, so you won't be able to upgrade your memory. So how much should you get? Well, 8GB is the minimum you want these days, so if you're planning to have a bunch of tabs open while browsing the web, or multiple apps open at the same time, you might want to go for the 16GB model. The Morefine M6 comes with Windows 11 Pro pre-installed, and unlike the Morefine M10, this one didn't have any key activation issues. I always try Ubuntu on each mini off a USB drive, and it has worked fine on every Alder Lake N CPU mini so far. This one isn't any different. So, what's this CPU good for? Ask not what an Intel N200 can do for you, ask what you can do for an Intel N200. It has plenty of uses. This is low-powered computing, but it handles day-to-day web browsing, office work, 4K videos, and much more, all pretty well. Now let's have a look at the benchmarks, which help reveal a whole lot about the M6. Oh yeah. At default settings, the N200 is running at a lower power limit, and it really shows. The M6 beats the fanless Neos May by a few percent, but loses out when the power limit is increased. I'll show you how to up the power limit later in the BIOS section. The M6 is behind the fastest N100 by almost 10%. Multi-core results, better than the Neos May at default, and worse with the power limit increased. That's 26% down on the best N100 result. In video encoding, it doesn't manage to beat the previous generation N5095 unless the power limit is increased. And if you were wondering, then yes, even the integrated graphics is power starved with the default settings. There's a huge jump of 33% with a higher power limit in DX11. It's the difference between being near the bottom to the top of the chart, and almost the same result in DX12. So the takeaway from this is just up the power limit and we're mostly good, right? Nah, not that simple unfortunately. More power means more heat and often more fan noise to deal with. There's a reason why a lower power limit is chosen by the manufacturer, and we'll look into that shortly. The included SK900 NVMe drive performs similar to most mini PCs with Intel's Alder Lake N CPUs, and that being PCIe Gen 3 X2 speeds, which is half the sequential transfer speed you'd get when paired with the higher end CPUs. That's because processors like the N200 have limited PCIe lanes to go around. Does it matter? I don't think so. The most important figure is the random 4K for a fast and snappy Windows experience, and we're so far off saturating the Gen 3 spec on that front, it's not going to happen anytime soon. so the included drive is just fine. The best part is that you can add another NVMe drive in the M6 for additional storage. Games and emulators on the M6 N200 should run better than an N100 with the power limit increased, but it really depends on the requirements. As an example, League of Legends, which stresses the integrated graphics, definitely performs better with a much higher frame rate. But a CPU-heavy game like Valorant pumps out more frames on the N100, which makes sense after looking at the benchmarks. I'd say a top-performing N100 is the minimum for this game, and the performance coming from the M6 just isn't good enough. GTA 5 needs a lot of graphics horsepower, and it runs a bit better on the M6, around 10% on average. The one thing really holding back console emulation on these processors is the iGPU, so we're stuck to 720p resolution for most games. Morefine's M6 does better again, but still can't hold a locked 60 FPS in one of the toughest to emulate PS2 games. While the 1080p dream for most games will have to wait for at least another generation of CPUs, as the M6 just isn't getting there. And there's another big win for the M6 with GameCube emulation. Still not 60 FPS, but a lot nicer than the N100. The Mario Kart Wii holds 60 FPS no problem at all. Maybe it will do the same at 1080p with the next generation of budget CPUs. In the BIOS, this Mini does allow you to choose what happens after a power loss incident, and also has the option for Wake on LAN. So as promised, to increase the power limit, head to Advanced and then Config TDP configurations. I just forced the max power limits by choosing 30 watts for PL1, 28 for the time window, and 30 watts for PL2. Save and exit to enjoy better performance at the expense of higher CPU temp. There's nothing outstanding about the idle power draw with the M6, it's just mid. While the maximum depends on the power limit you use. I recorded 6 watts extra at the maximum, and that 6 watts really makes the cooling solution struggle. 98C is not a good result with the power limit increased, and that's why the manufacturer went with a lower one. It's definitely thermal throttling under a multi-core load when you pump more watts in. The strange part is that the noise level is consistently low either way. I was hoping I could mess with the fan speed in the BIOS and lower the CPU temp, but nope, I didn't find anything to work with. Included storage drive doesn't have a working temperature sensor, so I'm not going to include it in the chart. From what we saw earlier, there's no cooling, but there are some holes on the bottom for airflow, which is better than nothing. I did thrash it for 15 minutes and thermal throttling didn't kick in. Yet. Right, time for the conclusion. Morefine's M6 is a pretty cool, flat, pocketable mini PC and is nice and quiet. Having dual M.2 NVMe slots is great to see at this budget end, and accessing the storage drives is super simple. This one's a quiet mini PC, and upping the power limit didn't increase fan noise at all. What I don't like is the default performance. Sure, it's better than a last generation chip, but the N200 is power starved. Cooling struggles with the power limit increased, so you might have to mess around in the BIOS to get a better balance between performance and CPU temp. Also, where's the fan option? Or is this already running at 100% fan speed under load? And there we have what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Compromises. It's a really cool form factor, and it's quiet, but you get lower performance with the Morefine M6 than you would with a bigger Mini. If you don't mind a box that's still small and performs great, then check out the Morefine M8S N100, which is one of my favorite budget mini PCs right here. Cheers!